one of the issues that concerns me most is one around child protection. And there's an interesting article on the ABC today that highlights the need, the desire, and sometimes the plain um, disinterest in issues around child protection, particularly where kids are placed. So most children, once taken away from their parents, often inappropriately, but nevertheless taken away, are placed in foster care. Now, some of those foster care placements are fine. Foster parents have been doing it for a long time. But even that, as is indicated by this article, is not enough to guarantee the safety of those children. So what they've done over the last number of years is they've implemented a program in most states whereby you have to seek a working with vulnerable children's check. Now, it doesn't matter who you are, but if you are working with kids or you've got kids in your care, whatever, then you have to be able to have this check in order to ensure that you are a safe person to work with these kids. Now, this system has failed miserably over the years because we've had people like Shane McCauley, who ran a pedophile ring, who was working for the government, and he either had a working with children's check and it just wasn't appropriate because he was a pedophile, or we have other groups of people who tend to have been working with children for a long time, but they have other kids in their care, their own biological kids, for example. So what checks are made on biological kids to prove whether or not they are appropriate to be with children? Particularly in this particular case I'm going to outline to you in just a moment, where a 70-year-old foster parent who's been a foster parent I think for quite some time had a 20-year-old son, and that son sexually abused someone that the mother had in her care. So the question really remains is, are they giving children to appropriate foster parents, given sometimes their age, and are they giving them to put them into families where there are older kids who may abuse their younger foster child? So this is an interesting story, so I'm just going to bring that up and we'll talk about it. The title is Kids in State Care Left with Carers Who Haven't Got Working with Vulnerable People's Check. Now, firstly, all kids, all parents, everybody that's in that family needs to have a working with children's check, particularly if you're obviously if you're over 18. In this case, this person I think was 20. So why wasn't a check done on this child? And they interviewed the person who was in foster care to talk about what this situation was like, particularly for her. Alicia's childhood home appearances mattered. In Alicia's childhood home, appearances mattered. She grew up in an affluent suburb of Melbourne, attending some of the best schools. Behind closed doors, people didn't see all that, she said. For all the wealth of her home, Alicia would spend a lot of time in the depths of wardrobe, retreating from her stepfather's fists. And how often do we hear this story where the mother chooses to have a new relationship, and that person, stepfather, often is abusive of the stepchildren. And so it goes on to say, for all the wealth of the home, Eliza spent a lot of time in the depths, retreating from this man who was physically assaulting her. But even with the stepfather gone, she felt unloved at home, neglected even. So often kids, even in affluent households, feel neglected, rejected, whatever, because sometimes the relationship that a person tends to have, that is the parent, tends to have, is more important, in fact, than the child. As Alicia's relationship with her mother broke down, Victoria's Child Protection Authorities stepped in. They placed the 15-year-old in experienced foster care. Alicia estimates was somewhere in her 70s, probably far too old, sitting in a new room decked with a school and bunk bed, Elisa felt like an intruder, which is what often kids will say when they go to a foster home. So when a new foster brother, the carer's son, in his 20s, invited her to go for four-wheel driving, she felt grateful to be included in what he was doing. That became like a thing. If he was going to the servo even, I'd go too. If he was going to hang out at a friend's house, I would go too, she said. Having won her over, Elisa said the man started sexually abusing her. In June last year, Elisa, now in her 30s, was offered compensation by the National Redress Scheme for the abuse she endured under government care. She wasn't an isolated incident that only happened to me. It's very common and it's not spoken about. It's only being spoken about when it ends in tragedy, she says. Or, as I would say, when people choose to report it. Apart from that, a lot of these incidents go unsighted, unrecognised. In a statement, it said the abuse and mistreatment of children and young people was unacceptable. Well, no kidding. You know, I love it when they state the bloody obvious. Of course, it's unacceptable when kids are abused at any level, but particularly when they're abused in care. We apologise to affected individuals and families and strive to work with service providers to continually improve our policies and procedures. Factors such as age and gender of members of the foster home were taken into account when finding a suitable placement for a child, the department said. Well, maybe the department needed to be a little bit more mindful that there was another young person in that home, an adult, and perhaps a psychological assessment needed to be made of that young person to see whether or not he was appropriate to be in that home with this younger person. And maybe that would have drawn out something about him that certainly could have been questionable, but it wasn't in this case. But people with intimate knowledge about the system say the problem is not confined to one state or territory, and governments failing to ensure the homes where children are sent are safe. And that is so true. We have countless examples where kids have been abused while in foster care or residential care. So there's no place. So you take kids out of an environment in which they supposedly were being harmed, and you place them into an environment which they're further abused. In this case, this young person was taken from a home whereby she was physically abused and felt neglected. Certainly a service could have been put in place to help her in that, help the parents to deal with that issue, but as a 15-year-old, she was shifted to another home. She might have even been better in a residential care facility, who knows? She was going to age out in a couple of years anyway. So, and we don't know the circumstances around why she was taken and why she was placed in this foster family. But nevertheless, the issue is that more work could have been done, perhaps to prevent her from being taken away, or at least provided her with some sort of independent living facility, perhaps, may have been an option for her. She said the Child Safety Department not only left children in potential unsafe homes, with carers who had concerns raised about them. So there are these families, these foster families, where the department is already concerned about them because issues have been raised, but choose to do nothing. And this is where it's critical. When you know that there is potential for abuse, or there has been abuse, even worse, and you choose to do nothing, then that is so wrong. And I know that this person got a payout for the abuse she received, but it was probably minuscule compared to what she could have got if she sued the department for placing her in an unsafe home. So it goes on to say they were manually checking the daily list of alleged offenders against the names of people the government had trusted were looking after some of Australia's most vulnerable children. They weren't given full names of people. They were often guessing whether someone with the right initials and surname was the person on the list that they were checking in terms of who were cleared, said this person. Until last month, it was law for ACT kinship and foster carers to have a valid working with vulnerable people registration. Jo said the government had not been enforcing the policy, which she called the bare minimum assessment of whether the person posed an unacceptable risk to children. She said one agency had around 70 carers on the books who did not have a valid registration. Right, and it goes on to say, another former employee of the ACT government, child protection worker Melissa, who left in 2020, said she had been reprimanded for investigating the background of some of the carers children were placed with. If I thought something was wrong, you can request checks kind of on the quiet. Most of the people were coming back with violent offences, drug offences. The most common was domestic violence offences, she said. Their argument was always, we've reviewed the current living situation and investigated the current safety, and we've deemed that it is in the best interest of the child to stay where they are. That is bullshit, actually. That if you have, they remove kids from environments where they are unsafe, and sometimes, a lot of the time, they should not be doing that, simply because those children, with a little bit of help from the department and other services, and providing courses and some sort of supervision, a lot of those families would be okay in terms of having the kids returned to them. But no, under all circumstances, we must remove children because we're so bloody risk averse to the problem around child protection that we are willing to place them into environments where they are further abused. And whichever way you look at it, and this is one of the most frustrating things for me, I've been working in this stuff for well over a decade now, and the most frustrating aspect of it is that the department believes that they are the better parent when they are not. And we must make a stand against the department's continual abuse of children and hold their feet to the fire and let them know that they are being watched. The media does a great job, I think, in reporting many of these issues. They are of interest to the community, and they should be of interest to all of us, really, if we're interested in the well-being of children. Because you do not know at what point the department's going to come in and take away your child. And are they going to place, and if they do, are you certain that the place in which they're placing this child is the best place for him or her? Often it isn't. And we need to ensure that if they're going to take away kids because they think they're the better parent, they have to prove to be the better parent. Let me know what you think. Make a comment below. Also, contact me on this email address. That'd be nice. And also, please, I do ask you to subscribe to my channel so that you can receive notifications about further videos that I might put out. So thanks everybody for being with me. Take care, look after yourselves and be safe.